What up, RDP community? Matt Schifferly here with another episode of the Red Delta Project podcast, minimalist diet and exercise strategies to help you maximize your results. Today's episode is about 3 super strategies that I've noticed over the years that people who get great results, they all use these 3 strategies. So the first trap that people fall into is they put too much of their proverbial eggs in one basket. They use one single strategy. You ask them, you're gonna lose weight, great, how are you gonna do that? Keto. Or intermittent fasting. Okay, what else? And they're like, that's it. Or you're gonna build muscle. Great, I wanna get big and strong. What's your strategy? More weight on the bar. Okay, not bad, but what else? And when we have too much of a narrow, influential mindset, what we do is you significantly limit the amount of power you have to make your results happen. And that's because there is no single cause. We often fall into this idea of, I'm looking for the one thing that's going to work for me because we think there's a cause to your results. What's the diet that causes weight loss? What's the exercise that causes me to build muscle and stuff? And the fact is, none of these things cause jack squat. You don't have direct causes, but instead you have influences. The causes that are actually responsible for your results are due to the natural principles of Mother Nature. I talk about this more in my book, Fitness Independence, but the world we live in, the universe we live in, is duality in nature, yin and yang, basically input and output from a fitness perspective. And both input and output, whether it's calories in and out, or stimulus versus adaptation for the physiological changes, both are responsible. It's the balance between the two that are responsible for your results. So anytime we look at any one thing, be it a diet or an exercise or something, it's not a cause that's altering that principle directly, but rather an influence to one side of that, or maybe sometimes both sides, but usually one or the other. So when you have a single approach that you're using, it sets you up to, one, have very limited influence to that principle, so you're only gonna get so far. 2, it's also incredibly stressful to try and maximize that amount of influence because the more you try and fulfill that, the more work it takes. And 3 is it leaves you incredibly vulnerable to influential compensation. So you may be focusing on that one thing, like how many carbs are in my diet, but you're completely ignoring all of the other influences like physical activity, metabolism, fat intake, and all these other things that are still very important influences that basically compensate and keep you in balance and prevent you from getting the results you want. So to prevent this, the folks who get the best results use a multi-influential approach. So instead of going after one thing, they'll say, I do X and Y and Z and W and 100 other little things. And this may start off as a one thing, like, I started off walking during lunch hour at work, but then they layer and they add in things over time and it builds up. And what this does is it completely reverses that trap. So you have much bigger overall collective influence towards that principle, so your results are way better. You also have diversified influence, so you can ebb and flow with the times. It's not as black and white, it doesn't make or break you. You can have a flexible diet approach, you can have a flexible exercise approach and still satisfy that principle much more. And it's also a hell of a lot easier to maintain, so it's not an on again, off again thing, but it's something that you can be flexible with. Speaking of flexibility, that's another big trap that people fall into, is believing they have to be on the strict, straight, and narrow all the time to get the results. And we hear this all the time, like, I eat so strict and I do everything by the book when it comes to my program, everything to the letter, which sounds great on the surface, but it can actually hurt you in the long run. And the reason is because you've got something that's static and fixed in a flexible and ever-changing world. It's the whole analogy of the oak tree breaks over in the wind, but the willow tree bends and ebbs and flows. So the folks who have the best results and keep those best results over time tend to have more autonomy and a much more flexible approach to their diet and exercise plan. So they'll look at their situation and say, okay, here's my general strategy, but I don't have this equipment, so I'm going to do this other exercise instead. I don't have this food available at this restaurant, so I'm going to choose this other thing instead. And they have this flexibility and the autonomy to make their own decisions and their own calls. They're not trying to do it by the book. They're not black and white, and they're not trying to be strict, straight, and narrow all the time. Instead, they're being flexible and they're adapting to their circumstances. Not only is that way less stressful, but also in your given circumstances, you may find that making a change is a much better way than what you would have done if you stayed straight and narrow. You may find a better exercise than what you normally would have done. You may eat something that makes you feel even better than if you stayed strict on the diet. And being flexible and having the autonomy so that you can make your own decisions helps facilitate that for better results that you can keep for longer periods of time. And then the third trap that people don't fall into when they want to increase their chances of success is this idea of forcing yourself to do things that you really don't want to do. Now, it's certainly true that in order to make changes, you sometimes have to challenge yourself and get outside your comfort zone. That's absolutely true. But there's this idea in our fitness culture that the best way to get results is to do the things you really don't want to do. You hear that in diet, like eat the things you don't want to eat, or if it tastes good, don't eat it. Or in the exercise world, like the best exercises are the ones you don't want to do, which is all hogwash. Forcing yourself to do things you don't like to do is almost a guaranteed recipe for failure. Sure, you can do it for a little while. You can force yourself for a certain amount of time, weeks, maybe even several months, but eventually you're going to lose motivation for it. But the folks who have far better results are the ones who have an emotional alignment with the methods that they use. So they feel good about what they're doing. They enjoy the diet, their strategies they follow. They enjoy the workout they do. They're not doing it just for the result. There's an intrinsic value in doing the very habits themselves. And you know those principles about how to get things done. Like as long as you've got more calories going in than going out, you're losing weight. You can do any kind of exercise you like. You can do any kind of dietary strategies you like. Same thing with exercise. I don't care why your muscles are working harder. They're going to get bigger and stronger if you work them progressively over time. You can do any kind of exercise strategy, any type of equipment, any type of exercises you want. So it makes no sense whatsoever to be like, I hate this exercise, I got to go do it. Why? There's no reason why you should force yourself to do that, because it's just eating up emotional energy that you could spend into actually getting what you want out of the exercise. And then you also have emotional alignment between your current state and where you want to be. And this is a little bit harder to kind of get under the skin and figure this one out, but without a doubt, whenever someone makes a drastic improvement in their body or their health in any way, shape, or form, there's an emotional shift that happens where they look at their current situation and they're like, this is bad. I really don't want to be here. And or there's a magnetic pull to the situation they're going towards of, I really want that to happen. And it's one or the other, oftentimes a combination of the two. And usually when we're struggling to get the result we want, we either don't have enough of an emotional pull towards the result we're trying to achieve, like, yeah, I want it, that'd be pretty cool, that'd be nice. No, not gonna happen. Like, you have to be like obsessed with this. You will not lose weight and get the muscles that you want and the strength you want until you're absolutely obsessed with it. And you're like, I have to have this. It's all consuming for me. That emotional drive. Same thing with the current state. Is if you're like, yeah, I don't want to have this gut anymore, or I'm kind of skinny and it makes me a little self-conscious at the beach, but it's no real big deal. You're probably going to stay where you're at. But when there's an emotional shift, like a lot of times people start taking their health more seriously when they have a health scare. Like the doctor is literally telling them, if you don't make changes, you're going to be dead in 5 years. That'll really kick some people in the pants and be like, oh my gosh, I really need to make something happen. And that's when they'll finally start, like, that diet finally started working and my workout program finally started working, when the results went from, I kind of want it, it would be pretty cool, to I have to make this happen under penalty of not being able to have my grandkids, grow up with my grandkids kind of thing. So there's an emotional alignment with your current state and where you want to be. And when you have an emotional pull that's greater towards where you want to accomplish from where you are now, then changes almost happen on autopilot. It's almost like trying not to change under those circumstances. And I know it's not as simple as just do this and don't do that, but you can start to look within, do a little meditation, do some inner searching into your deep subconscious of, how do you really feel about your current state? And how do you really honestly feel about where you want to go? And it's only going to happen if you look at your current state with a very deep negative disdain and you really can't be there anymore, and or there's a very strong pull to where you want to go. But if there's not a big pull to where you want to go, and you don't really mind too bad being where you're at, you're probably going to stay there regardless of what you try to do. So I hope these new strategies gave you a little bit of insight into what you're doing now. If you have any thoughts or questions, down below in the description. If you're watching this on YouTube, as always, thank you very much for listening. If you're listening to this in audio on the podcast, of course, again, don't forget reddeltaproject.com for the full RDP library, and free ebooks are available for you there as well. Thank you very much for listening. Talk to you next week. Be fit, live free.